Okay, folks, buckle up. A man, a dog, a walk in the woods, and somehow it ends with an alien screaming inside a chest freezer. There's a teleportation bracelet and, of course, government agents. Get ready for a wild ride. The scream in the freezer, a Washington mystery, begins. The sound came from inside a freezer, a normal humming suburban chest freezer in the normal house in Washington state. And the thing that made it had been sitting in there for days, wrapped in a survival blanket, presumed dead. Dr. Jonathan Reed said he went for a walk with his dog in the woods and came home with the body something not from this world. He said the government wanted it back, and he said that was only the beginning. So, what really happened in those woods in 1996? Okay, deep breath. A guy hears a scream coming from his own freezer, and his first thought is, must be the alien I put in there. Not the ice maker, not a raccoon, the alien. Now, most of us would need 3 days and a locksmith just to open a freezer that screamed. But here's the thing I actually love about this story, and it's not the freezer. It's that thousands of people heard it and went, yeah, checks out. That's the mystery. Now, let's get into who this man really was. Who was Dr. Jonathan Reed, the man behind the alien in the freezer? Before the tape, before the radio fame, there was just a man with a title, Dr. Jonathan Reed. Now that doctor did a lot of quiet work in this story because it told you to trust him before he'd even said a single word. The problem is that the credentials behind it have been questioned for as long as the story has existed. Investigators who tried to pin down his academic background kept coming up short. No clear paper trail, no obvious institution, just the title and the calm way he wore it. And maybe that's what made him so convincing. Now, Reed didn't come across as a wild-eyed believer shouting on a street corner. He presented as measured, reasonable. A professional man describing something impossible in the same way you would describe a car accident. Now, when someone that composed tells you that they found a body in the forest, part of your brain wants to take them seriously because why would a doctor make this up? Now that question is the hook the entire story hangs on. Why would a credible man risk everything on a story this strange? Well, keep it in the back of your mind because the answer changes depending on how the rest unfolds. Now here's what we can say for certain. Reed lived an ordinary life on paper. He wasn't a public figure. He had no obvious platform, no built-in audience, nothing that screamed future paranormal celebrity. He was, by all appearances, a regular guy. And regular guys don't usually end up at the center of one of the most talked about alien cases of the 90s. Now, something happened to change that, or at least Reed said something happened. And the version he told would go on to travel further than he could ever have walked with that dog. Because the next part of the story is where the ordinary ends and the impossible begins, on a quiet afternoon in a forest with a leash in his hand. So, we've got a doctor whose doctorate is doing a lot of heavy lifting and not a lot of showing up in records. And look, I don't want to be unfair. Maybe he's a doctor of something, doctor of vibes, doctor of freezer management. But here's my honest take. The title is the trick. You put doctor in front of a name and suddenly your brain files it under probably real. Con artists have known this forever. It costs nothing to type. The scary part isn't that he claimed it, it's how well it worked on all of us. The 1996 forest encounter, what Reed claimed happened. The year is 1996. Reed says he's out walking his dog in a wooded area of Washington state, the kind of place where the light gets thin between the trees and the sound of the road fades behind you. Ordinary, right up until it wasn't. Now, according to his account, the dog reacted first. Animals usually do in stories like this. It went alert, then aggressive, and it moved towards something small and dark standing among the trees. Reed described the entity as short and strange, not human, not animal. And then, he said, it did something to his dog. Now, in his telling, the dog didn't survive the encounter. Now, I don't want to go into detail about the death of his dog, but just to say that it's the emotional core Reed leaned on. What matters for the story is what he did next. In a panic, in what he described as pure retaliation, Reed said he grabbed a nearby branch and struck the creature, repeatedly, until it stopped moving. And then came the decision that turns a strange story into an unforgettable one. He didn't run. He didn't call anyone. He wrapped the body of this small, dark being in a silver mylar emergency blanket that he said he always carried in his backpack when hiking with his dog. Then he picked the alien up and carried it home. Now, Don't you think that is a very odd choice? Now, most people who believe they're just witnessed something impossible want distance from it. Reed wanted proximity, he wanted the evidence. Now, that instinct to collect rather than flee is a question quietly forming underneath this story. And was this the reaction of a terrified witness or the setup of a man who already knew where the story was heading? We can't answer that yet, not honestly. All we have at this point is his word, a missing dog, and a body wrapped in a blanket being carried out of a forest in Washington. Now, what he did with that body is where the story stops being sad and starts being genuinely bizarre, because he took it home and he found somewhere to keep it cold. All right, I've got some questions, and they're logistical. You've just watched something impossible kill your dog. Now, you are understandably having one of the worst days of your life. And your move is to gently tuck the dead alien into a blanket like it's a sleepy toddler and carry it home. Look, I lose my nerve carrying a spider out of the bathroom. But honestly, this is the detail that hooked people, and it's clever. A liar says it ran off. A guy building a legend keeps the body. Reed kept the body. It's the difference between a witness and a showman. The alien in the freezer, the scream that started a legend. Now, here's the image that gave this whole case its name. A man standing in his own home, holding the body of what he believes is an extraterrestrial, trying to figure out where you even put a thing like that. Well, his answer was the one appliance built to stop things from decaying, the deep freezer. He said he wrapped it in a crinkly silver foil survival blanket and buried it among the peas and steaks, then closed the lid. And for a little while, that was that. A body on ice, a secret in the kitchen. He had proof, sealed and preserved, and you can almost imagine the strange calm of thinking the worst was behind him. It wasn't, because days later, according to Reed, the freezer made a sound. Not the hum of the motor, not the click of the thermostat, a scream. He described it as blood-curdling, the kind of noise that rearranges your insides, coming from a creature he was certain had died in the forest and frozen solid since. The thing in the freezer was awake. Now think about what that claim actually asks of you. It's no longer a story about finding a body. It's a story about a being that survived a beating, survived days in sub-zero cold, and then woke up. That's not biology as we understand it. That's something that treats death and temperature as suggestions rather than rules. So, what actually happened in that house? Because there are only a few options, and every one of them is a headline. Either Reed genuinely encountered something that defies everything we know about life and death, or he experienced some kind of break from reality, or he was, from the very beginning, telling a story he knew wasn't true. And notice how the story keeps escalating. First an encounter, then a body. Now a resurrection in a chest freezer followed by a scream. Each beat raises the stakes and asks you to swallow a little bit more. Now that escalation is worth watching closely, because it becomes the pattern that eventually gives the whole thing away. But in the moment, for the people who first heard it, it didn't sound like a red flag. It sounded like the scariest thing they'd ever heard, and soon they'd be able to hear it for themselves. Okay, I want to stick up for the freezer here, because it did nothing wrong. It had one job, keep peas cold, and it got drafted into a horror movie. Also, why the heck is he keeping it? Days go by, the alien is just chilling, literally, and Reed's like, yep, that's where he lives now. At what point does the electricity bill make you reconsider your life choices? But the resurrection twist is the genius move. A dead alien is a story. An alien that wakes up screaming is a legend. He didn't just raise the stakes, he defrosted them. The Reed tape. Photos, video, and government agents. A story like this lives or dies on one question. Where's the proof? And Reed, unlike most people who claim these things, said he had it. Now, not a blurry photo snapped in a panic. A tape. Photographs and video, footage of the creature itself, laid out for the world to examine. And when that material surfaced, it changed everything. Now, suddenly, this wasn't just a man telling a campfire story. There were images. There was a shape you could point at, a face you could study, a body you could freeze frame and argue about. For believers, the tape was the thing that lifted Reed's account out of pure fantasy and set it down into, well, look at it for yourself. Evidence has that power. It short-circuits doubt. Your eyes see something and your gut says it's real before your reason gets a vote. And then Reed added the element that transformed the case from strange to dangerous. He said he wasn't alone anymore. He claimed that government agents had learned what he had and that they were hunting him for it. The body, the tape, the truth. He said powerful people wanted it buried, and that he was running, hiding, protecting the evidence at real risk to his own safety. This is where the story taps into something bigger than one man and one freezer. The idea that the government hides what it knows about alien life is one of the most durable beliefs in modern culture. Now, Reed didn't invent that suspicion, he just borrowed it. And by wrapping his personal story inside that larger fear, he gave it armor. Because now, any hole you poke in his account has a ready-made answer. Can't verify his credentials? They erase them. Can't confirm the details? They're covering it up. The cover-up becomes the proof of the very thing it's supposed to be hiding. If a story explains away every doubt by pointing at a shadowy them, is it strong or simply unfalsifiable? Well, hold that thought, because Reed was about to take his tape and his terror to the one place that could turn local legend into national obsession. A radio show that owned the American night. The government agents, of course. There are always government agents, and they are always excellent at their job, right up until the part where a guy with a camcorder outsmarts them. Now here's what gets me. The cover-up angle is a cheat code. It means every missing detail becomes evidence. No records erased, no proof confiscated. It's a story that eats its own plot holes. I'm not saying agencies keep no secrets. I'm saying "they're after me" is the most convenient thing a man can claim when you ask for a receipt. Very handy. Suspiciously handy. Okay, onward to the radio. Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM. How the story went viral. To understand how big this got, you have to understand the platform. In the late 90s, if you were awake at 2 in the morning and you believed the world was stranger than the daytime let on, you were listening to Coast AM. Art Bell's voice carried across the country in the dark, calm and curious, giving airtime to the unexplained without laughing anyone out of the room. Millions tuned in. It was the internet before the internet, a nightly gathering place for the weird and the wondering. Now, Reed appeared on the show in November 1998 and again in March 2001. And those broadcasts are what turned this story from a strange local claim into a phenomenon. Bell's audience didn't just hear about the freezer alien, they absorbed it. They repeated it. They argued about it in the earliest online forums and traded copies of the tape. The story escaped Reed's hands and became something the community owned together. It quickly got nicknamed the Alien Burrito due to the alien being long and thin, wrapped in silver foil, buried among the peas and steaks. And part of why it spread so well is that the radio was the perfect medium for it. You couldn't see the seams. You just heard a composed man calmly describing the impossible, and your imagination did the rest. No harsh lighting on the prop, no frame-by-frame analysis, just a voice, a scream, and the willingness of a huge audience to lean in and wonder. So, the deeper mystery, not what did Reed find, but why did this particular story stick when so many others faded? And the answer is partly Reed and partly the moment. The late 90s were primed for it. Trust in official explanations was shaky. Interest in aliens was everywhere in the culture. And Art Bell had built the ideal room for a story like this to catch fire. Now, did the story spread because it was true, or because it arrived at exactly the right time, in exactly the right place, told to exactly the right audience? Because a hoax doesn't need to be believable to everyone. It only needs to find the people who want to believe at the right hour when they're most willing to, and Reed had found them. Then he made a choice that would eventually break the spell. Shout out to late night radio, generally, because there's no better venue for a story that you can't fact check. Now, Reed on the radio is a man performing a magic trick with the lights off. And it worked because at 2 a.m. your critical thinking is asleep and your imagination is doing bench presses. I say this with love for everyone who believed the setting did half the work. Same story told at a bright office lunch gets you a polite, cool anyway. Told by a calm voice in the dark, legend. The medium wasn't neutral, it was his best special effect. The teleportation bracelet, when the story went too far. Every hoax has a moment where it reaches past what it can hold. For Reed, it was the bracelet. And during his interviews, he introduced a new detail that hadn't been front and center before. He said he'd found a strange silver bracelet in the woods near the encounter. And this bracelet, he claimed, was not decorative, it was a device. Alien technology. Something that could teleport him between dimensions. And we started with an encounter in the forest, then a body, then a resurrection in a freezer, then government agents. And now, casually added to the pile, a piece of jewellery that lets a man from Washington state step between realities. The story had left the ground entirely. And this is the pattern I asked you to watch for earlier on: escalation. A believable hoax tends to stay small, guarding its one impossible claim carefully. Reed's story did the opposite. Every time it needed more attention, it grew a new limb. More proof, more danger, more powers. That constant expansion feels thrilling when you're caught up in it. But step back, and it starts to look less like a witness recounting events and more like a storyteller who keeps adding chapters because the audience keeps listening. The bracelet is the tipping point. That people heard interdimensional teleportation bracelet and instead of walking away, leaned in closer. The appetite was never really for evidence, it was for wonder. Reed understood, maybe better than anyone, that a certain kind of audience will forgive almost any leap as long as the next reveal is bigger than the last. At what exact point does a story become impossible to believe? Now, for skeptics, that line was crossed long ago. For true believers, apparently it hadn't been reached yet. And the strange, uncomfortable truth is that there isn't a single line for everyone. There's just how badly each person wants the story to be real. Reed had pushed his luck about as far as it could go. And the investigators had been watching, quietly, patiently, building the case that would take it all apart. A teleportation bracelet. He found the one accessory that does everything, in the woods, presumably next to a discarded fanny pack. And here's my favourite part. It's an escalation problem. He keeps upgrading the story like it's on a payment plan. Body, sure. Resurrection, fine. Dimensional travel jewellery? Now hang on. But nobody hung on, and that's the real lesson. Once people are invested, they'll carry your luggage up any staircase you build. I gently suggest that if your evidence needs a magic bracelet to stay interesting, the evidence was maybe never the point. The story was the product. The Debunking: How the Freezer Alien Hoax Fell Apart. For all its reach, the story had a fatal weakness. Now, Reed had shown his proof, and proof, unlike a spoken claim, can be examined. And once investigators got serious about the tape, the freezer alien began to come apart in exactly the places Reed had been most confident. Start with the specimen itself, the creature in the photo and video. On careful inspection, it wasn't otherworldly biology at all. Researchers identified it as a movie prop. The look that had frozen so many viewers was built from basic special effects work and, at its centre, a rubber alien mask of the type that was widely available in the 90s. The face that launched the legend was, in plain terms, a costume piece. And once you know what you're looking at, you can't unsee it. The mystery drains right out of the image. Then came the detail that ended Reed's credibility for good. At one point, he attempted to prove the bracelet's power on camera, staging a televised moment in which he appeared to teleport. Let's take a look and you can judge for yourself. It was meant to be the ultimate demonstration. Instead, it was the confession. The teleportation was produced with cheap, obvious video editing tricks of the era, stitched together with stock sound effects. The kind of thing that might fool a glancing look, but falls apart under any real attention. He'd reached for his biggest proof and handed everyone his clearest fake. After that, the structure collapsed. The disputed credentials, the unreliable government pursuit, the endlessly growing claims, and now a prop and a stage stunt sitting in plain view. Investigators laid it out, and the paranormal community that had carried the story for years had to face what it was: not suppressed truth, fabrication. Investigative researchers eventually discovered that Dr. Jonathan Reed did not exist in any medical or psychological registry. His real name was exposed as John Bradley Rutter, an actor and salesman with absolutely no medical or scientific background. But knowing it's fake doesn't fully explain why it worked. The rubber mask was always a rubber mask. The editing was always cheap. None of that was hidden from the people who believed. They had the same information everyone did. The difference wasn't the evidence, it was the desire. And that gap between what we can see and what we want to see is the real subject of the entire story. Which brings us to the only question that actually matters. A rubber mask and video editing that a bored teenager could outdo. That's the big secret, and honestly, I'm not even mad at Reed. I'm impressed by us. We looked at a Halloween mask and a fake teleport with stock whoosh sounds and collectively said, the government is hunting this man. The debunk is almost too easy, which is the whole point. It was never really hidden. We just didn't want to look. And that's the uncomfortable bit. The trick wasn't good. Our willingness to be tricked was excellent. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. We've earned it. Why we wanted to believe the freezer alien. So, the freezer alien was a rubber mask. The teleportation was a video edit. The doctor's credentials may not have existed, and the government agents almost certainly didn't. On paper, this story has nothing left. And yet, here we are, decades later, still saying his name. And that's the part worth sitting with, because the interesting mystery was never really, is the alien real? We've already answered that. The interesting mystery is why a story this flimsy travelled this far. And the honest answer is that it gave people something the truth usually doesn't. It gave them wonder, and a secret to be in on, and the electric feeling that the world might be stranger and more alive than the daylight admits. Now, Reed didn't sell an alien. He sold them that feeling. Their mask was just the delivery system. And that's the question this whole thing has been building toward. If we can look directly at a rubber mask and choose to see a visitor from another world, what does that say about how we decide what's true? No, not just in 1996 on late night radio, but right now, today. Because the machinery that made the freezer alien hasn't gone anywhere. It's stronger, a confident voice. A piece of evidence you don't examine too closely, a shadowy explanation that turns every doubt into more proof. A story that grows a little bit bigger each time it's told, aimed straight at the people who already want to believe it. Now swap the freezer for a screen and the tape for a viral clip, and the exact same playbook runs out every single day. I'm not telling you to stop wondering. Wondering is the best thing about being human. I'm just asking you to notice a difference between wonder and being worked. Between a mystery that invites your questions and a story that punishes them. The real question he left behind isn't about aliens at all, it's this. The next time a story feels too strange to be a lie, will you look closer, or will you want to believe? But there is one last twist to this story, the double bluff conspiracy. Now, despite being completely exposed, the case has an ironic legacy. A small group of fringe believers in online forums still argue that Reed's original footage in the woods was real. They theorise that government agents threatened Reed and forced him to make the intentionally terrible teleportation video. The theory goes that the government purposefully turned him into a laughingstock so that the public would stop looking into what was actually hidden in his freezer. So, as with all great stories, it lives on. Well, this story is kind of a gift. It's a low-stakes rubber mask in a freezer rehearsal for the high-stakes stuff we deal with now. Same trick, better graphics. Now, if a man with a camcorder and a Halloween mask can move a nation at 2 a.m, imagine what a good editor and an algorithm can do at lunchtime. So, my takeaway isn't don't be curious, it's be curious out loud. Ask the annoying questions, poke the story. Stay weird, stay skeptical. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Now, so many of you have told me that you don't get notifications of my new videos or the live streams. And this is because of the new way YouTube works. In order to get notified, you need to select the bell icon and select all, and that will do it. Otherwise, YouTube just won't send you the notifications. Okay, if you'd like to support the channel further, I've got Patreon and YouTube memberships, links in the description below. As always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Okay, my friends, be safe. And until next time, stay curious.